He's a rewarder, so continue to seek a God of order, a supporter to the one that is me. I cried an ocean with every tear that fell off of my cheek. His arms are open to the broken, it's in love and he grieves. I know the wicked try to scatter the sheep. So once again, welcome to Underground Railroad, the Red Zone. We got my bro Sam and Abe here, Sam and Abraham. We got my brother Jack, Pastor Jack here. We're going to interview him. I actually met Pastor Jack. He's part of our sister church in Lenexa, Kansas. We part of Freedom Initiative, Christ is Victor movement. So we both pastor a church. It's been an honor to serve beside him. And so he's on here today. We're going to do pretty much like a testimony today to give him an opportunity to share what God has done in his life, what he's doing in his life, and what brought him to the point where he is serving Christ in the manner in which he has been called at the Lenexa area. So we'd like to welcome you, Jack. Say what's up to peeps.
How you doing, everybody? I appreciate you guys having me. I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit of my testimony. And yeah, like you said, just how I've experienced God's love, and I've gotten to the point where I'm at now.
So if you don't mind, could you kind of share with us like how long you've been pastoring the church over the Lenexa? Give them an idea.
Yeah, for sure. I've been a pastor at Freedom Initiative Lenexa since September of last year. Been involved with the church for approximately 3 years in total.
Yeah. And so like when it comes to like I heard like you and Sam talking earlier before we get into the testimonies. What is some of the challenges you kind of face when it comes to pastoring church, and especially when you have a heart for God's children, for his people?
Yeah. Challenges, really, it's just for me, being a young pastor has been really finding that balance because of my love for people God's put within me, being able to balance everything in life, from being able to be there for the sheep of the church and being a good shepherd, the best shepherd I can be for them, and making sure that I'm also being a good father, good husband. I do work full time outside of the church. So just really balancing and navigating all that. It has been a challenge in being there, for my family, plus the members of the church, and all that, everything that is involved in those things.
Yeah. I most definitely can relate to that, man, especially when it comes to ministry and having a full-time job and being there for God's people, so I know that's really a challenge within itself. So we're just gonna go ahead and have Sam pray us in, and then we're gonna go ahead and kick started with the testimony. All right, Sam.
All right. Yeah. So, dear Jesus, I just thank you that you brought Jack to us and that he's going to minister to us, and we'll just see how you've worked in his life. And God, and we know the same God that worked in Pastor Jack's life is the same God that's going to work in our life and has. And God, we just thank you, God, for bringing him to us and to speak his testimony. And Jack, we thank you for for you coming here today and talking to us. And so, man, let us know what did God do in your life that transformed you into the man that you are today to being a pastor.
Yeah. So you ready to get started?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So first of all, being a pastor and involved in ministry, and this is actually the probably second or third time I've ever shared my story or even bits and pieces of it. I've done it, here and there, small pieces. So I just felt the Lord really was telling me that this is when you gave me options of what the topics, I was like, felt like God was really saying, share your story. So just going back, I grew up in a family that really there was a lot of love. I was exposed to the gospel and Jesus at a young age, and super involved in church, youth group, all those things. I don't believe that I had a full and complete understanding of the gospel at that time, but I knew Jesus was a man, he was the Son of God, and that he died on the cross for us. But just fast forwarding a little bit, I think whenever things started to kind of turn, where my family and myself found some distance between us and the body of Christ was around the age of 13 or 14. I started noticing in our home that my mother had some addiction issues, and was struggling and fighting some addiction to pills and alcohol. And, you know, it might have been there all my life. I'm unsure. But you know, at that age is whenever it started to be clear to me that had been going on. And because of that, it caused my father to want to leave that marriage. And we went through that process, which was super damaging to our family, where we stopped attending church and doing those things. And from that point forward, you know, and all those struggles is really where I found myself really starting to turn to the things of this world and living in darkness, using drugs, partying, chasing women, doing all those things that the world does. And that really progressed for many years, really up to the age of 29 years old. Found myself incarcerated off and on for most of the ages between 25 and 30. Probably 4 of those 5 years I spent incarcerated. And really just to get to whenever God intervened in my life, and I don't doubt he was there the whole time, but I had been strung out on drugs, using methamphetamines, living in that darkness. And my mom had passed away a couple months prior to this. I was having a rough time. I was in depression. I was contemplating suicide, and I had prayed a Hail Mary prayer to God to save me from the life I was in. I was running with a group of people that, quite frankly, I was scared that if I was to leave and abandon them, that probably wasn't going to stay alive if I did. And I just, I didn't know where to go. And it was approximately 2 months later after that prayer that I was arrested for a crime after an altercation with a girlfriend. And it was actually for a crime I didn't commit. I was guilty of doing so many things. Fugitive FBI or Wyandotte County FBI task force came and picked me up on kidnapping charges and some assault charges and all. And they came and picked me up and took me to jail. I had no idea what this was about. I just knew that I'd had a really intense argument with my girlfriend. I'd kicked her out a couple days prior to them coming to my home and arresting me. And really, this is, I guess, whenever everything changed. I was locked up in Wyandotte County. I didn't know what my fate was going to be, and I was in there only for 2 weeks before a fellow inmate came up to me and asked me if I wanted a Bible. And I believe my response to him was no, I didn't want a Bible at the time. But he told me to take it anyways. I was in max custody, so I was only coming out about, I don't know, an hour and a half a day in Wyandotte County at that time. And I sat in the cell. I started trying to read it, and he did give me some instructions. He said, start in the Gospels, start in John, start reading John. So I tried, and it really wasn't sinking in, but I really felt the Holy Spirit nudging me to keep on. So I kept on reading, and then I found myself grabbing some spiritual growth books. And I picked up a book by Rick Warren's wife, can't remember her first name, called Choose Joy. And I knew at that time in my life I had no joy. I'd lost my mom. I'd spent years in addiction and being a thug on the streets and living in the darkness. But I knew I wanted joy. And I just remember reading that book and explaining that Jesus had died on the cross for my sins, and I could be forgiven for everything I'd done, and I could have a fresh start. I could be made new. I could be pulled from the darkness to the light. And I believed those words. And it all started to make sense of what I had been reading in the Gospels when I read that book. And I found myself that day on my knees, truly repenting and asking Jesus to come into my life and be my Lord and Savior. And I didn't feel anything miraculous at the time. I just sat there and wept. I was actually just starting to get sober for the first time in many years, and I was grieving my mom. So I just sat there and cried and cried and cried. But I believed the promises in the Bible that I had read up to that point. And then for the next 13 months that I was in there for that time, I sat there and just devoured the Bible, every bit and piece of it. I read book after book. And over those 13 months, I probably read between, 50 to 75 books alongside the Bible. I listened to sermon after sermon. I started listening to Christian music, which was a big deal for me. I listened to hip hop, rap all my life, and started listening to different music. And I felt everything that I was slowly leaving me as I continued to stay in his word. And from the way I spoke to the way I thought, and I just stood on every promise. And I'll never forget Jeremiah 29:11. I know it's a popular verse, and I remember reading that verse and it just being a promise and a truth that I stood on through that whole process as I was in there looking at 32 years of prison for something I didn't do, but also realizing I had lived such a corrupt life for so long, realizing I was guilty of a lot of the things that I knew when I read Jeremiah 29:11 that that was for me, and that's for all of us. And I just read that truth and knew that he had something more for me. And most importantly, when I read that verse, when it said that when you seek him with all your heart, that's what I focused on, because I know his promises were good, but I knew there was something I needed to do, and that was to seek him and to knock and to ask and do those things. And I did that faithfully. And I left there a different man. I ended up going to trial for for what they were, state of Kansas thought that they had something against me. The ex-girlfriend actually came and testified against me in this. Went clear to trial with a lawyer that really was a state appointed attorney. He was actually a really good attorney. I found out later. At the time, I didn't really know, because I didn't really have much interaction with him until it was about trial time. I was freaked out, but I had a peace in my heart that I knew that whatever happened, whether I went to prison for that long or if I got out, that was where God wanted me. And I remember telling my stepmom that while I was incarcerated, and her being flabbergasted that I would even say that I would be okay with staying in prison. But I just had the peace of God that surpassed all understanding that the scriptures talk about in my heart at that time. And but thankfully, when I did go to trial, they found me not guilty, all 12 jury members, and I was acquitted. And I think about that in the same way that God forgave me for everything, and he acquitted me of everything I'd ever done in my past. And I was to be able to walk free, just like the truth had set me free while I was in there. And it was one of the most amazing things I've ever been through. I just gets me emotional thinking about the elation that I felt whenever I was found not guilty at that time, because the attorney that I had really never gave me any promise, not that they typically do, but he never gave me any really encouraging words. He said, look, man, it's her word versus yours. We'll see what happens. But I knew that God had my back. And with all the prayers, I knew that I was going to have favor in that situation. And I did. And it's not been easy ever since I was released. I'll tell you that I did get super involved when I was released from at that time. I got super involved with the church. I was baptized. I got super involved in kids ministry. I think I had a lot of pride going on still in my life that I hadn't allowed the Lord to remove from me. And I actually did have a short period where I relapsed shortly after my release. But I knew right where to turn, and that was right back to the Lord. And got back up on my feet and kept going and kept seeking him. And yeah, so I've just continued to be faithful as best as I could through since Jesus came into my life. And I've just continued to show up. I'll never forget whenever I first went to Freedom Initiative the first time, and Matt Thomas was speaking in front of the church, and he said, I'm just looking for people just to be faithful and just to show up. And if I can say one thing, that's one thing that the Lord has given me, is that ability, desire to just continue to show up for Him, to show up for others. And I just did. I continue to show up. Anything that the church had asked or needed done, I just was willing to step in and fill in wherever I needed, whether it was just loving on others, picking up chairs, putting out chairs, cleaning up floors, taking out trash, whatever it was. And just continue to seek the Lord each and every day through prayer, staying in His Word, sitting at His feet. And, He just continued to bless me with a good wife, kids. And eventually the door opened up for an opportunity to step into a pastor position. And, so I feel like I kind of hopped around a lot in that. So.
Nah, you didn't hop around, man. That was for real. It's the first time I really heard your testimony all the way through, and hearing you speak about your beginning with the addiction, going in and out, then the false accusation, even to the point losing your mother, and that you're like that, and just the tears of grief, the place of being desperation, that hopelessness, and all these things that you were speaking about in your testimony. I never even realized how much we connect until you shared that, right? Because it's like those raw things, those things that the waves of life that beats you up, and then God rescue you from that. I see now why we connect. I see now why, uh, uh, like we brothers in the Lord together, right? Because it's that hard, that hardship that you went through is the very hardship that God uses through you, for His people, for His flock, because you have a level of understanding the things that they're dealing with, the things that they're going through. So just hearing your testimony today, right now, man, it's really heartfelt for me. I'm grateful for you coming on, just sharing um, what your testimony. I've often say on here that our testimonies are relevant. You know what I'm saying? Uh, they have purpose. You have purpose. You have your life have meaning. You have a calling, and it's where people are able to experience the goodness of God through our testimonies. So yeah. So what you think, Sam?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I loved it. So I can't help it. I can't help myself, because I know it's just a testimony. But man, if you were to talk to the same kid at 13, found his mom strung out, you left, there's obviously a rift in the family. Like, I have some people in my life that are going through a very similar circumstance with a total breakdown of the family. The kids are in between two different houses. The mom is out of her mind on drugs. They're not street drugs. They're the government drugs and all that different type of dope. And she's whacked out of her mind and an alcoholic. And what would you say to a little kid right now going through that, whose faith's being tested, who may wonder where God's at? How could God let this happen? And I don't know what was going through your mind specifically, because you didn't hit on that. But if you could speak to that 13, 14, 12-year-old, 10-year-old, 8-year-old that's having a breakdown in the family, and what was a godly family, what is the way out of the woods for that kid? If they were listening, if there was a kid listening going through that, what would you say to them to keep them from walking down and jumping into this path of bad friends and drugs?
Yeah, I mean, what a great question. And as I think back to my own situation, I believe that there were people in my life at that time through the church. At that time of my life, I do trust and remember, know that there was a different path. So there was a split in the road, and I chose to go this other way and lean on these things of the world, to cope and to numb myself from the reality of what was going on in my life. Because the reality is that we're going to go through these things in life, and we have a choice to make. And if I could give any advice, it is obviously to take the other way. But there, I would hope that there is some solid individuals, people that are faithful to this child, in the church or in the family, that they can lean into for that support and love, and in a way that they can experience the love of God through them, and be encouraged and lifted up and cared for in those ways that they're maybe not getting because of what's going on in their life within their family, versus turning and going that other path, where the world can grab a hold of them, through drugs and or whatever it might be, or seeking the things of this world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So from what I hear, your advice would be really leaning into, especially if they have a church home, some level of support system, some level of positive influence that they can connect with, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What about you, Sam? Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah,
Go
that's
ahead.
good. Yeah, that's really good, Jack. Yeah, I appreciate you for sharing it, and I knew that this was just a testimony, but like I said, I couldn't resist myself, just because I know some of the people that will be listening to this, it'll be something that man, they can relate to, with kind of specifically your testimony. So that's why I asked.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you for sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, like I said, man, I often say on here, the love is real because we know the pain is real, right? Uh, and so that's our greatest hope when it comes to the Underground Railroad on the red zone, right? Is that we want to be able to share God's love because we have experienced His goodness through the hardship He has brought us out of. And so, anytime we can get genuine people on here to be able to express what they've been through and point to the one who brought them through, that's the greatest message that we can put out, to give that hope to those who are listening, who's actually going through something that you went through in life, and they can see a testimony of who you are, what God's doing in your life, to where now you are passionate over a church, what God can do in a man's life, in a woman's life, if they choose to lean in, trust, but like you said, be faithful, right? Keep showing up. And so that's just a testament of the glory of God, about His goodness, about His love, about His mercy and His grace. And so
Sure.
I'm gonna leave up to Sam. He can uh, um, close us out. But
Yeah,
before we close out,
yeah.
go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, hey, Pastor Jack. So, if someone wants to check you out, where your church is at, where would they go to see you in your church, and if they wanted to speak to you or be counseled, or where would they go to speak with you?
Yeah, so you can go to CTV Freedom Initiative on Facebook and connect with us on there. We currently hold our services right now at the Street Side Auditorium at Foundery Church in Lenexa. It's 87th and Lackman at 1 p.m. on Sundays.
Okay.
Well,
Everybody, you guys know then how to get a hold of Jack and Pastor Jack, and we appreciate you guys for listening. And hey, Pastor Jack, whenever you want to come back on, and me and Abe, we really appreciate having you, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. And for that, until next time, you guys be good out there.